Welcome to Real Estate Meets AI. I'm Sandeep Ahuja, CEO and co-founder of Cove, the AI-first architecture practice. If you're curious about how AI is reshaping buildings and spaces from the inside out, you're in the right place. Here's what I love about today's conversation. I've got an economist who used AI to read every zoning code in America, and the guy who tracks 8,000 prop tech companies and can tell you why the Empire State Building was built faster in 1930s than anything we build today. Arpit Gupta from NYU Stern and James Robert Scott from MIT are coming at the AI and real estate question from a completely different angle and completely different angles to each other. And that's exactly why this is going to be so good. So let's go. First up, we've got Arpit Gupta, Associate Professor of Finance at NYU Stern. You probably know him from his research on office real estate apocalypse. The paper puts a $556 billion price tag on what remote work did to commercial real estate. But what you might not know, that he's now teaching AI in finance and building his own LLM tools to analyze zoning codes. Arpit, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Amazing. And next up, we've got James Robert Scott, who's the Director of Real Estate Transformation Lab at MIT. James was literally the first employee at MIT's Real Estate Innovation Lab when it was launched. And he's built what's probably the most comprehensive map of prop tech in the world, tracking over 8,000 companies. He just co-authored a major report on AI in the industrial real estate. James, it's so wonderful to have you today.
Sandeep, thanks so much for having me. Really looking forward to this. And I like the way you opened up the conversation. It was almost like you were pitting myself and Arpit against each other. And I was like, no. We're gonna get on really well. This is not going to be
friends.
One side. But yeah, exactly.
We're all friends here. Well, Arpit, I have to start with your Twitter handle, Arbitrage. That's Arpit plus arbitrage, I'm assuming, right?
Right, yes. Sometimes people say, was it Arpit Rage or something like that? But I'm punning off of the financial arbitrage thing.
That's what I thought. So tell me about your journey from math undergrad at University of Chicago to publishing in the American Economic Review about the office apocalypse to now teaching AI to MBA students. I would love to hear about that journey.
Absolutely. So I think really the through line is trying to use data to understand the world. When I was graduating college back in 2009, we were in the midst of the financial crisis. And I could already see back then that real estate was a really big part of the economy and it wasn't working very well. And we were just beginning to get all these great new data sets to understand the financing of housing, the way housing is located all across the country, and just really interesting data sets that allowed you to explore more what's going on in connection to its importance with the whole economic landscape that we all live in. So I really pursued a PhD to try to disentangle and understand those drivers a little bit more. I got a job as a professor here at NYU Stern, where I've been for 19 years. And throughout the time, I've been largely exploring real estate, household finance, and urban economics, and how these things interplay, influence the world. The way I connect to AI is I realized that so many of the real estate topics I was interested in had a large textual component to them, specifically regulations, that I could use these LLM tools to help me understand. And so I started to develop pipelines and ways to source all that information and understand it in ways that would deliver new insights about the ways in which housing regulation ultimately impacts our built form and the way we live.
So the common thread really across everything is your fascination and love for data, and maybe actually very specifically for you, large data sets, and kind of the dance that they're doing to see what are they actually telling us? Because more data doesn't necessarily mean we know more. More data sometimes can just mean more data, and we still know about the same or less. So that's super interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Just one example to your point about how more data isn't always helpful. One of the big struggles I've had, I would say, in my career is trying to get historical data, because we can often get more cross-sectional information about, here's another market, or here's another part of the country. We can kind of get some more information there, but we're often limited in our ability to get information from the past. And so that's another dimension in which I've started to use LLM tools more recently, is to explore the depth of information that we can get historically, which kind of expands our data in a different way. It's not necessarily big data, but it is like really informative data because it's covering something we don't understand very well.
Makes sense. All right. Well, James, you came from a different direction, I think, right? You were in commercial real estate, went to MIT, and then became the number one employee of what became the Real Estate Innovation Labs.
It's it's much more convoluted than the way you put it.
Dear.
The way The way you said it, like there was a lovely trajectory there that just all made sense. It was exactly the exact opposite in lots of ways. I was a lawyer for many years, almost 9 years, before I moved to the US back almost 11 years ago. And when I came here, I wanted to move into something along the lines of real estate private equity at the time, and then find myself at MIT. And through my time there, which is back 11 years ago, I came across some incredibly brilliant, inspiring individuals who were showcasing this whole new world of technology within an industry that was possibly not ready to accept it at that stage, and has found itself, through many challenges with adoption and innovation. But they kind of opened my world up to a whole new concept and idea. And through their insight, I joined up and started working for them on different projects. I mean, as a student, and then after graduating, and my trajectory changed quite dramatically over the years. And that I started getting involved in a lot of hardcore research within that specific area, to the point that MIT came to me and asked me to build out a class. I now have 3 classes that I'm part of it within MIT. I run the real estate transformation lab. I'm one of the directors of the actual program within MIT at the Center for Real Estate, now our master's program. And yeah, it's one of these situations that, if you'd asked me 10 years ago, was this where I was going to go? I'm not sure I would have been able to even imagine it. But, a lot of things happened in that time that helped facilitate and drive technology. There was obviously advancements within the tech itself. COVID had a huge factor within that, and then trying to help facilitate and drive that innovation through an industry which finds it sometimes very hard to accept and to deal with. It's one of the more interesting areas. Often the business school environment where you can showcase certain plans of lines of how to integrate new technology within an industry. They work very, very well, and they have worked well for many, many years. But real estate is such a nuance and such a niche area. I realize I said that in a European way, but it's so unique. And oftentimes, you'll find with a lot of tech and a lot of finance individuals that, I'm not saying that they look down on real estate, but they think it's a much easier business. But what they don't realize is actually far more convoluted and far more difficult in order to drive change and navigate change within it, because of the essential things like something as like stakeholder complexity, which doesn't make it easier.
And the nuance of the uncertainty, like everything is physical, everything physical needs to be built. I was on a call recently where, we're talking about how the construction costs went up 34% in the last quarter. That's just one of the many factors that we're playing at. So I couldn't agree. I couldn't agree more. What I was getting at was, what was it like building a research lab from scratch? But what I basically pulled away was that it was incredible. It was different.
It was
not what you expected.
No, it was, I don't get me wrong. I was able to take some incredibly hard work that had been done with people that I'd worked with, specifically Andrea Shagu back in the day with the Real Estate Innovation Lab. And I was able to build on that a little bit with certain relationships but I went in a sort of much more of an industry perspective, as opposed to a research perspective in lots of ways, in order to try and help drive change and innovation within real estate. And when I say real estate, that's a vast amount of different tasks, jobs, areas, from the design and construction to the leasing to the investment, property management. It's a wide range of individuals within that, to then obviously sit on top of my favorite group of individuals, who are the real estate developers out there, because trying to, if you can change their mind, you can change anybody's mind.
That's probably true. All right, so let's do this thing that we do on the show, the AI meter. On a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 is AI averse, we're actively resisting, and 5 is AI forward, that we're leading charge. Where is the real estate industry right now? And James, you literally track thousands of prop tech companies, so you first. What's the number and why?
That's really hard. That's like saying the music industry, and we won't define it by different genres. I'll have to just pick, different areas, because if you look at the financial markets and investment and owner operators at a high level, they're at the 5 level across the board and have been for a long time, had their toes in this, and they're navigating it with spending significant amounts of money to try to build it. And then probably on the flip side, you have things like facility stroke property management, which have found it tougher and harder to really discover the true return on investment for a lot of the products that have been out there in the marketplace. But that's, again, rapidly changing. That's another part of this that it's hard to mention, sort of work that I've done in previous years, but everything in the last 2 years kind of has changed so much, and that evolution and advancement of capability is something that we've never really seen before. And to understand that has been a really, really tough process. And it's not a case of it's on pause right now and you can kind of catch up with it. You're at a place where something new is coming out again. That, I mean, from an agentic capability or from a quantum capability or something else that's coming on stream. And so trying to kind of keep up with all of this is as tough a job I think that anybody could possibly have.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Same question for you, Arpit. So what's interesting about what James said is that it's really in the last 2 years where we've kind of reinvented a lot of it. Like the knowledge is changing, it's all transforming. So same question to you, Arpit. Where are we at and why?
I'll maybe give a simpler answer. Maybe I'll just say two, just because I'm comparing real estate to other sectors and verticals that I'm tracking and looking at. If you compare, again, software, for example, that's a tier 5. There's tons of software code that's now completely AI written. The whole industry has really taken to it. And if anything, you're now seeing some companies have to pull back a little bit, like Amazon, and saying like, okay, we're not going to vibe code everything. We'll have some senior engineers review the code before we deploy it to AWS so it doesn't crash all the time. But that's like the level that they're at, that they have to actually like tone it down a little bit relative to what they were able to deploy it out. And a lot of areas in finance do seem to be adopting it very rapidly. We're seeing that across both public markets as well as private markets, for everything from deal sourcing to extracting information from documents to thinking about investment theses to thinking about connections and associations of narratives between numbers and text. Real estate, I think, lags behind a little bit for a few reasons. Of course, the industry is like a little bit more conservative than some of its other counterparts, but it also confronts a variety of physical real world challenges, whether that relates to building and constructing properties, maintaining and operating them, or thinking about the challenges in opaque marketplaces that don't necessarily have the same level of price discovery. So all that generates very unstructured data and workflows that are often associated with multimodal data. So we might have images and PDFs and Excel documents, and the document base is very scattered. And therefore, the challenge is to kind of take that very messy workflow and find ways of integrating it, which is just a little bit easier in other sectors than in real estate.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
So basically, if I pull back, you're both not saying things that are too dissimilar. I mean, sure, there's parts of, James, what you said, the industry that are definitely on the cutting edge, on the finance, equity, trying to figure out the deal structure, perhaps standpoint, that's much further ahead. But on the whole, like when you come down to the nuts and bolts of actually buildings, like building buildings or, kind of putting occupants in it, we're kind of at that mid-ish level, like somewhere between 2 and 3 is kind of what I heard.
I'll add to it a little bit. Like, if you think about it, it all makes sense in certain respects, in that, if you're dealing with something like high level finance, where the data itself is far more freely available and you have the ability to utilize it in a different way. Plus also something that, you rarely see in the real estate world across, no matter what sector it is, some sort of level of R&D, whether that's budget or looking to try and do new things, and kind of see where that can go. But then in other areas of real estate, you don't necessarily have that data capability to be able to extract it. It's too nuanced. It's too siloed, like from different directions, or it doesn't necessarily coincide with the concept of what big data really is, with something else, which coincides with the budgetary restraints that something might have. Like the construction industry, I wouldn't be going completely off piece here to say that they work off margins of anywhere between 2.5% to sort of 4.5%, 5%. It doesn't leave an awful lot of wiggle room for R&D, like, to get things wrong. So there's not a huge amount of incentive within their organization to drive change and take a lot of this on. However, in light of the just a comment you just made there with the price points, which were already at a place where, a lot of real estate development didn't really work from a construction perspective already, to where they've already gone, even in the last, again, a stat, even since January, like a 12.5% increase in construction costs, unless you utilize some sort of new technology or capability in order to drive efficiency and reduce costs or reduce some sort of time component within this. We're not going to see an awful lot of stuff being built in the near term.
Couldn't agree more.
One caveat to that, which is, I think, the data center rollout. So that's not AI in the sense of people in the industry using AI as a tool to achieve whatever objective there is, but it is a picks and shovel story of how real estate is meeting and accommodating the AI build out in the rest of the economy. And the scope and scale of that data center build out is massive. The latest numbers I saw suggested that we're doing more construction volume now in data centers than we are in office buildings, which is my former interest. So that is one area in which the real estate sector has moved very rapidly, is to accommodate the physical expansion that is going to be necessary in the rest of the AI economy.
It's interesting you talk about data centers. I was listening to this podcast from, I want to say 20 BC, where basically they were breaking down the sheer amount of bets that have been taken with the limited amount of proof that we have thus far that those are going to convert into revenue. And the point that either way this gentleman was making in the podcast, which I roughly agree with, is that it's not like it's not going to pay off, and that AI is a fad or a short term thing. It's certainly not, but the time horizon within which it pays off or within which it works is a real question mark. And then when you pair that with all the energy challenges that are happening, where folks are really starting to push back against either way hyperscalers and this, that, and the other, there's all these more micro data centers sprouting up that I've heard more and more of. It's just such an evolving world, and that all still doesn't take into account, well, as the tech gets better and models get better, I would hope that our need for energy improves as well, because it would really suck if it doesn't. Not disagree, just a side point there. That's a whole other world. So, Arpit, obviously, you've built in your most recent research, and we talked a little bit about it, and it got me really excited because I have an architecture background. So, walk me through zoning codes, AI research tools that you built together. What was the problem you were trying to solve?
Absolutely. So this is joint work, I should say, with Alex Bartik and Dan Milo, who are collaborators of mine in this project, where our big picture objective is to try to create a data set that puts the zoning regulations and housing regulations into structured information across all cities in the US. That's sort of our North Star where we're trying to get to. And we're definitely not there yet, but we're making a little bit of progress along the way. And where we're starting out is we began with a target of answering about 20 or so questions about the zoning code that previous researchers had thought was interesting to examine in localized areas. So they had done this analysis where James is in Boston, looking around the local Boston area and answering a series of granular questions about, like, what's the minimum lot size? What is the requirement for a public hearing when you have new construction? Is multifamily even allowed? Are townhomes allowed? So trying to understand various aspects of use regulations and some bulk density requirements in lot sizes, setbacks, things like that, as well as process regulations that pertain to how and when housing construction can happen. How is it allowed? So we began with that initial set of questions, which again is kind of back tested based on what humans had already responded to in local areas. And we scaled up the process to answer those questions across a really broad sample of all American municipalities. So this provides us for the first time information on what the actual codes say in a harmonized data set across the US. And to do so, we use something that is now, I would say, one of the most dominant AI applications in business that I've seen. So if you're just new to AI, you're thinking, okay, how can I use AI in a way that's a little bit more deep than just tossing some documents into ChatGPT? Well, we're using something called retrieval augmented generation, or RAG. So this is a architecture that allows you to pull specific documents and figures from a corpus of text. What's going to be relevant for us is, we have a document, we want to answer a question about, what is the minimum lot size requirement that can be done in a particular area or district or something like that. And you can, if you want to, just toss that document to ChatGPT and it'll give you a response. And we kind of found that that simple thing was like, let's say, like 60% accurate, right? So I think for most people in the industry, that they're probably like, well, that's not really good enough for me. I kind of want to have a much higher level of trust in the data. And where that's coming from is, like, when you throw in these like really long contexts into the AI and you have it sort of search through the whole span and you don't really give enough guidance on how to exactly answer the question that you have, it kind of flounders a little bit. So we built a lot of these tools in, again, through this RAG architecture, basically allows us to find the needle in the haystack a little bit easier. So we're kind of like zoning in on the part of the document that's going to be most likely to respond to the answer. We get a answer in a much higher likelihood. And then we have a little bit of an audit trail to help us think back and examine whether or not that was a true citation for the fact that we want to establish. So all of that kind of gets us to accuracy rates, say more like 90%, higher on some questions and lower on others. And for us as researchers, that's sort of a good stopping point. We can say, like, all right, we have a good enough data set. We build that out across the country so we can have, and this data is all publicly available. Also, you can find it on my website. And that allows people to kind of search and look at this data and use it for research or other purposes. And it is just one example, I think, of the potential that we can ultimately get to by taking all this unstructured data and beginning the process of making it more structured so that we can better understand the regulations and rules that we live with.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So if I was to pull out the two things that I think, again, knowing a little bit about this world as an architect, because we need zoning data all the time, right? Like we're working with developers, they'll be like, here, I'm trying to build something on my site. The first thing you have to do is zoning research. Like, well, okay, what can you even build? You need a variance. What's possible? What's not possible? This, that, and the other. So instead of obviously old school going to your Municode website and doing it manually, that's maybe 2 years ago. So no one does that, hopefully now. Step two, you're saying some people will throw that particular PDF into ChatGPT, Claude, whatever their choice of chat AI tool, and then it'll pull out information, but it's neither traceable nor very reliable. So as an architect, I can't put my reputation on the line and be like, well, that's what you can build because I'm 60% sure that's not good enough. So what you have built is significantly more accurate and traceable, which is, again, for different types of research, different types of professions, different types of work, a very critical element. And that's basically what you're pulling out. Is that a fair, simple representation in very layman words of what you just described?
Absolutely. And if any of your listeners are interested in moving along that chain, very good place to start is Notebook LM, which is a product by Google that provides this RAG functionality in a more usable interface. So what you can do with that tool is upload your favorite zoning documents or housing regulations or building codes or whatever is the source of document that you're interested in, and then just query that database just as you would ChatGPT or anything else. And the difference is that the Google Notebook LM product is going to just provide a little bit more verification of the specific source of the document because it's basically doing RAG on the back end in order to give you a little bit more of an accurate query.
That makes sense. Well, that's amazing. James, you've been working on some pretty wild technology, or at least what I would call wild technology over at MIT. Obviously, I read about the heat leaks in buildings, the tech tracker, but I'm sure it's continued to even evolve based on what was even written based on this research. I would love to get from you one concrete example of where AI changed what was possible. The coolest, most exciting thing that comes to mind.
So again, I come at this probably in a very different way these days because I probably come at it more from an industry component more than a research component. And that's just been an evolution of a lot of the things that I work on. There's some incredibly brilliant things that are out there, and we'll call it products that are out there, but they only really work from a research perspective. I've seen this variations of this in different localities, and it's so insightful. And you can see, like I'm like when I start using it, I'm like a Bart Simpson. Like when he gets the keys to the city, I start kind of dribbling a little bit, like because I get so excited. But then you kind of there's another element of this which is industry, and they oftentimes, because development is so localized, and most developers, if you were to think of them in your head as an individual, they're generally, they've been through 2 or 3 cycles, they're a little bit older, a little bit wiser and they've seen ups and downs, but they don't generally, unless you're talking about a large scale, national one, but even within the national ones, they have localized teams. And they have localized teams because there is certain nuances, regardless of the information, that are required to understand, and relationships that are required with cities and with government officials as much as anything else as well. And they know their, as I call it, their shire inside out. And so the next evolution for me, like with AI, and we're starting to see this now, is whether it works or whether it doesn't, but it's a really interesting concept. Something like artifacts AI, which takes kind of this element that Arpit has just taken. And then, like when you have a city like Boston, where there is a blanket zoning law of an FAR of 1, regardless of what the entitlement is. But it's so that you have to, when you go for a variance, you have to deal with the city at everything that you actually do. Well, that kind of takes a little bit of having capable and understanding out of it, because you're now dealing with individuals and you're dealing with people, with whoever they are at sort of at a city level or at a government level. So what artifacts have done is they've taken every single meeting minute that can be within an environment with all of the different people and all of the decision makers, and have been able to extract all of the information, and more importantly, a sentiment analysis and understanding of what each individual wants and demands when you go for a particular variance at any particular individual site. And so from that can build out and extract a profile of what that individual is, but more importantly, what is demanded from a personal perspective in order to achieve that variance. And that I see can be an extremely valuable tool to work for developers, being able to take that. And even though they'll have good relationships with people, people can have bad days, people can have, be in bad moods, but to have a really good understanding of what specific individuals who you might be dealing with on, the other side of the development process, what they want, what they need, and what they demand with everything that they do. And that's a really nice way to start utilizing AI in order to achieve quicker and faster development. And so instead of, finding yourself butting heads with the opposite side along the way, knowing what they need and demand, not that you won't have a good idea in your head, but having it there with true data, being able to back that up. And I think that's a really nice way to move a lot of development forward.
That's a really thoughtful way of putting it. So what you're saying basically is that yes, AI for data, yes, AI for cut and dry, black and white things. That's low hanging fruit. Duh. We're obviously going to do that, but it's humans that are super complicated. The thing that's really moving the needle is utilizing, AI to better decipher what humans actually want, because a lot of these projects have all these layers and many, many, many stakeholders and this, that, and the other. So actually listening, properly, truly listening is where maybe
Exactly.
AI can help.
If I was to frame it in a sort of an illustrative way, it would be like if there are poker players that are brilliant online because they have the data available and they can run the numbers in their head. And then there are brilliant poker players in person because they can read people and they can understand what the person's kind of motives are and what they're trying to achieve. And this moves it from being and having that capability online to be able to do it actually in the room. And I think that's where how I see it, which, I think it could be extremely valuable to a lot of people.
I agree entirely. This actually reminds me of a project. It was a public project that we recently were working on. And this was a really relevant building. And a lot of people from the community had a lot to say about it. And obviously it would be too time consuming and too expensive to have an architect actually read through every single one of those hundreds and thousands of comments and decipher an opinion on what that means from purely an architectural level. But to unleash AI on it, so to say, was actually a significantly better move to make sure actually we heard everyone. And sometimes it can help us hear people better than not. So I don't disagree at all. It helps with data and it helps with people. Love it. So last thing, obviously you both are talking to real estate professionals every day, developers, investors, operators who are trying to figure out what to do with this AI moment. And some are excited and I'm sure some are not excited and most are probably somewhere in between. So what's the one piece of advice you'd give to someone navigating this change right now? We'll kick it off with you, James.
I'm going to be really, really unfair here, and I'm going to go both sides of the fence. So, there isn't a business school, there isn't a consultancy outfit or anyone else out there that isn't putting structures in place for large organizations, whether they're real estate or not, in how to implement AI into their workflow and their systems and their people. But I have to say, and this is not my view, I'm going to steal this view. All of those structures that they're implementing all make complete sense. If it was as simple as that and just implemented this, 6-stage process with implementation, then it would be very easy and everybody could just go about that. But culture and location and how you do business, they all add a significant amount of nuances to already the most nuanced industry that I've ever seen or know of out there. And then I saw this really, really interesting play on this about 2 weeks ago by KP Reddy, who I'm sure a lot of people get, the regular newsletters from. And he was outlining, when it comes to something like Excel, what we do with Excel is when somebody joined an organization, there was no real formal Excel training program for all of the individuals. So while you might have it for finance, in certain aspects like a Wall Street prep or something like that, but what he was trying to get at was that, the C-suite, they might use Excel in a completely different way from, let's say, a pro forma analysis and sensitivity analysis and capabilities, whereas somebody on the marketing team might use it for constructing lists of individuals and, have some sort of CRM system that they might kind of use it from distribution point of view. And then you might have somebody who's working at, the reception desk, who's using it to keep tabs on who's coming in and out of a building, maintenance orders or something along those lines. And so what he was trying to showcase was that here is an incredible tool that's utilized in significant different ways by completely different tasks by individuals throughout an organization. And really how they came about having an understanding of it was they sat down and started using it. And they did that and they kind of taught themselves how to get the best out of it for what they needed to get it done. And so is that maybe the better way of going out there and showcasing, something like a Claude or ChatGPT, about the people within an organization, giving them an opportunity to try and figure this out of how it can be utilized for each one of their, the tasks that they need and have necessary on their day to day, and letting them build out a little bit of confidence and reporting back with some sort of understanding of what worked and what didn't work. Now, in saying all of that, I'm going to flip it again. You still need a process. You still need accountability. You still need governance. You still need all of that within that. And so somewhere in there, it all makes sense. And when somebody gets it all right, they'll write the book and everybody will follow and it will be a bestseller. But that's the reality of everything that everyone's going through.
Yeah.
I love James's point about kind of combining the flexibility with some sort of framework for how to adopt it. I think one thing that fits within that, which I think every organization or firm considering adopting AI should do, is establish a series of internal benchmarks, which is to say the way AI adoption works in any domain is the researchers establish the specific benchmarks, which relate to how capable AI is going to be at some series of typically technically defined tasks. And, again, for our project on regulation, we had our own human benchmark, which was how well the AI did at reading the regulation relative to this human counterpart. But in your firm, you can't just rely on those technical benchmarks because you have very specific business needs. So think about what those needs are. Think about what you need to do as a firm or organization. What are your benchmarks? Have some existing human point of reference, or whether it's here's a pro forma, and we do this analysis, and we get this IRR from this deal, and we kind of believe the spreadsheet. So how well is the AI going to do at matching the human performance in that benchmark? So you have a series of these corporate benchmarks, and then just test and see how every new model release does at this series of benchmarks. Maybe you're going to find for your business and use case, actually, you get better mileage out of Claude. Maybe for you, it's actually ChatGPT. Maybe for you, even though the model has this technical capability, like when you integrate it with your Excel and your files, it actually doesn't work. That's all something you can discover, but only if you have a rigorous process for determining ex ante, like here's a set of skills that we do that we kind of need to measure and benchmark. And then you have a process for evaluating how different model releases, how different approaches are going to do with that task.
Everything that Arpit said is 100% correct. The problem that I've seen in recent times with the real estate industry, and this is not me giving out about it in any way, but you're asking individuals to do something that they've never done before and is very much out of their comfort zone. And a lot of executives within large real estate organizations, they just want 3 bullet points. They want 3 things. Okay, this is what we do when we implement it, and that. Okay, now we've got an AI strategy. It takes a lot more effort than that. It takes a lot of self-reflection. It takes a little bit of inward company therapy to understand how your workflows really operate, understanding where the bottlenecks are, where the challenges are. And from that, then having that implementing sort of a situation, it's not just training or kind of AI literacy. It's about figuring out how do we find the greatest level of efficiency that can be created utilizing this technology. And that all of what I've just said there requires effort and work. And, it's not simple to ask people to do something like that when they have so many challenges on a day-to-day already within an industry it's been a rough 3 years, except if you weren't in data centers, right? But it really has. It's been a rough 3 years for this industry. And they've got so many fires to put out, and they're dealing with so many other issues. And now they're trying to be told to reassess and recalibrate how they even do their job. It is a big ask, and it's not a simple task either.
Yeah. I mean, to me, on many levels, y'all are saying basically different versions of the same story, or kind of different directions or different puzzle pieces of the same puzzle, wherein, yes, it's hard. Yes, you have to do it holistically. And no one person or no one company has it all figured out. So for all that are listening, if anything, this should be reassuring. Y'all are definitely 2 of the smartest people about this, and to hear that directly from you, who are seeing it on the very cutting edge, who are on the forefront of what's happening out there. I hope that's reassuring to all the listeners that you're probably not behind. You're probably where most everyone else is if you're in the middle of trying to figure it out, because that's what it sounds like, where most everyone else is. With that, I will say this was such an incredible podcast. Arpit, James, thank you so much for keeping it real, giving us your opinions. I so thoroughly enjoyed it, and I know so will our audience. I so appreciate your time.
Thanks so much for having me.
Sandeep, thanks so much for having us. Arpit, really great to hang out.
You too.
Thanks for listening to the Real Estate Meets AI podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe on your favorite streaming platform and follow us on social media at cove.inc. Until next time, I'm Sandeep Ahuja.